Hello, my name is Danny Blank, and we are here today talking about extending the growing season. And these are ideas on enabling farmers to move toward year-round production. In this session, we are going to focus on how to improve animal production. And the basis for this will be perennial forages. Animals are so important to farmers in providing income and meat and other products. And they are one of the quickest ways farmers actually make money. If a farmer has a litter of pigs that are born or some baby goats that are born, these small animals represent a lot of money. However, animal production in the tropics is usually quite low. It's far below its productive potential. And the traditional systems for raising animals usually involve communal grazing, where the animals will be on open lands or a field that's been finished, where they eat remaining crop residues. They might be tethered out in the field during the rainy season so that they can't get away, or they'll be shepherded loosely sometimes, or they are all together, in some cases, freely wandering, and farmers have to move their fields far away from the presence of animals, usually farther away from their homes, because livestock stay close to their homes at night because they are so valuable. But this also creates another problem for villages and yards, and that the grazing pressure is really high right around outside people's homes. And consequently, there is this absence of yard production right outside people's doorstep. And so people have to travel great distances to actually get vegetables to cook with, and don't have dooryard gardens as much, or they're more difficult to maintain because of the presence of animals. Under traditional systems, as I've already discussed, animals eat a lot of the remaining crop residues, and we've talked about how this contributes to lower fertility, and as God's blanket is consumed, as this mulch layer is consumed, it just creates all kinds of problems in exposing the land to the sun. The traditional system of raising animals also is oppressive to the natural environment. A lot of the native trees and vegetation under a constant grazing pressure. So these traditional systems of raising animals suppresses production around homes. It reduces production, yields in fields, and it suppresses trees and shrubs out in the wild. And God intends abundance for us. He intends abundance for the earth. He intends abundance for us. He intends abundance for animals. And we find that is not the case so much of the time. In an ideal scenario, there would be improved pastures for animals to graze and be rotated through. This is one of the most productive ways to raise animals. But this requires huge tracts of land, much, much larger fields than was commonly available. Schemes for raising animals in cooler climates, say in North America and Europe, or far south where it's cool as well, in Australia, Argentina. These systems of raising animals are based off annual crops like maize and soybeans, and through the making of hay and silage. And these systems can be challenging, especially those feeds. These systems can be difficult to incorporate sustainably and profitably in the tropics because of the limits of production that you have with annual crops. And it's competitive for the same types of foods that humans eat. So these systems are not usually as appropriate for farmers in the tropics with small plots of land. The systems that I talk about today are related to the discussion we've had earlier about the tropics, that more protein and energy can be raised in the tropics per hectare, but the basis must come through perennial crops, those that grow all year long, capturing that sunlight. And so we're going to discuss perennial forages, planted perennial forages, those that farmers deliberately start themselves and establish and for the purpose of raising animals. In many parts of the world, this exists already. Asia, many farmers in Asia use systems of planted perennial forages as the bulk of their feed for their large livestock. But for many, this will be a new concept, to actually plant species that will be harvested by farmers and actually carried to the animals by the farmer or on a cart. But there are many advantages to these kinds of systems. Again, these perennial forages, they capture the sunlight throughout the year. You can plant them once, and that's where the time is really the most challenging is the establishment stage. But once established well, you can harvest we say plant once, harvest for 30 years. Perennials are generally far easier to manage than annual crops. You don't have to replant them every year, and their roots go deep, and so they can find water and fertility more efficiently than annual crops. And perennial forages are faithful in that they can produce leaves even in dry seasons and in serious dry spells. Tree leaves and perennial grasses can provide incredible sources of protein and energy. And once established, a forage bank, we call it, the place where trees are planted and grasses are planted at very close spacings, labor can be greatly reduced. And this allows the farmer then to safely increase the number of animals. So again, forage banks, this is this concept of planting trees or shrubs or clumping perennial grasses very close together and kept small through frequent harvests. We depend on a large number of forage species for the raising of goats at Echo. We currently have about 15 species planted in our own forage bank that we harvest, but have harvest from a lot more species that are planted in other parts of the farm. How do you start a forage bank? Obviously, you need a protected area from grazing animals because this is going to be a cut and carry system. You must think about proximity to the animals and how far you're going to carry this animal feed. And also its risk that it's possibly could be grazed by your neighboring animals. So this all has to be part of the planning. And determining the number of animals you will raise is another factor, how much land you're going to commit. And you want to choose a diverse number of species that are suitable for feeds. We start a forage plots at Echo by starting them in a nursery in small sacks or pots. We do not direct seed them into the ground. We find that by starting them in nurseries, you can establish them much better. You can quickly take out the ones that didn't germinate or the weak ones that aren't doing well. And you can grow them during the dry season in a protected, safe place. And then at the onset of the rainy season, establish them in the field and they can take off. We have used a planting strategy that involves around 5.5 plants per square meter. That's what it comes to on average. The strategy we use is a double row triangulated at 30 centimeters apart. So we have this double row. The trees are planted every 30 centimeters on a triangle pattern, and then there's a 90 centimeter walkway. And this is important because when you walk through, you need to be able to get through without breaking or even hurting yourself. So we keep this center pathway open, and then we have that double row. And we've experimented with a couple different planting strategies and have preferred this one. And you will maybe have to most likely adjust spacings according to your climate and for the species that you choose. But we are pleased for the most part with the density in that we have good coverage of the soil. So we do have weed pressure, but it's not as high as if it was a wider spacing. And if you get too close, then the trees are crowded and don't do as well. But those wide spacings waste that sunlight and create a lot of weed pressure. The trees grow fast then if you establish them during the rainy season. And we prefer that they attain at least 1.5 meters, hopefully 1.5 to 2 meters in height before the first cutting. That allows the root system to get established. And then we cut them back to about 1 meter, and we manage them between 1 and 2 meters. And there will be many harvests in a year. Again, I mentioned that diversity is hugely important. Animals need a broad diet. And there will be fewer options when the dry season comes. So you really need to find those species that do well in the dry season, that still produce enough leaves to carry your flock through that dry spell. Dry seasons create huge limitations for farmers. And you really can understand a lot about the agricultural potential of an area by the length and intensity of the dry season. So again, I can't underemphasize the importance of having a diverse number of species, not to bank on just 1 or 2 or 3 species, but to have 10 or more in the forage system that you can feed your animals with in the dry season, diversify on a daily basis, or mix and match over a several day period. And this system works really well for sheep, for goats, for cattle, and rabbits. They are the cheapest animals actually for us to raise on the farm. The ruminants and the rabbits, they're fantastic on this kind of system. It's very low cost for us. And once these forage banks are established, the labor goes down. We're not going outside and tethering our animals and bringing water to them, or bringing them back and taking water to them. They have water all day, and they have ample food supply. And so these systems can be done in where the animals have access to a small pasture or a paddock, we call it, or a corral, or they can be confined in what we would call a zero graze unit, where they actually don't have room for grazing. So there's different ways that you can use this forage system. And this system is a tremendous way for farmers to extend their season by having dry season food available for their animals, so they don't have to sell off their flock when times get difficult. And it's a beautiful system that creates options for more farmland to be converted into other ventures, since the animals are not freely roaming. So you can really now expand other areas of the farm, because you don't have roaming animals or tethered animals in your farm that take up a lot of land that you're shepherding around. They are more confined or moved in a more controlled manner, and this really allows farmers to diversify their farming operation, so they can have vegetable gardens, and they can have a fruit orchard, and they can have a forage bank with multiple animals, and they can have fields planted with different crops that grow into the dry season, that they don't have to worry because their field is fenced and their woodlot is there protected from ranging animals. I now want to take you and look at some examples of forage species and forage banks and different systems using them in other countries. I think this will be a big encouragement to you as you look at some examples. And a lot of these, I really like to take pictures of these forages during the dry season, where you can really get an idea of a forage's potential. In this photo here, you see a forage bank of Caliandra in Zimbabwe. It is the height of the dry season. The dry season is just a few more weeks left. The rains will be beginning shortly here. And you can see there is still leaf production. The trees in the back, the forest trees in the back, just starting to have leaves. They're almost deciduous still. But the Caliandra, which is a valuable feed for goats, is leafed out. And even though it's not dense, it will be in a couple months, once it has that ample soil moisture. But you can see, it's not an impressive picture necessarily, but you can really get an idea. Some reports have said that you can harvest 46 tons of Caliandra per hectare. Now, no farmer is probably going to be able to commit or would commit that amount when you only have small amounts of land, but it's showing the potential that you can achieve on small amounts of land. This next picture was taken in Nicaragua during dry season, and it's of a plant called nacedero. It comes from South America, and is a huge tree. It's like 13 meters tall, and yet it is managed as a shrub. It is managed as a small, low-growing tree. Here you see it, again, not impressive because it is at the very end of the dry season, and yet there is still food available. In this next picture, you see the same place in Nicaragua, but 1 or 2 months now into the rainy season. I had to climb a tree to get up and take this picture. It was over 2 meters tall, ready for harvest. They were planted on about a 75 centimeter spacing here. They used a different spacing. It's impressive. You can't see the forest floor. This is capturing all that sunlight. It is exactly what we want to see. It is such a well-stewarded piece of land. I'm so happy to see it because it's fulfilling that this plant is fulfilling the role of just taking advantage of that sunlight and allowing this farm to be so much more productive and profitable. And it is a very profitable farm. It produces the highest number of rabbits in the whole country of Nicaragua from this farm. And you can see this nacedero is also shade tolerant. That's why I included this picture, seeing it in the shade. In this next photo, you see I'm in Honduras here, and I am looking at a tree plot or forage plot of Gliricidia. Gliricidia is also a large tree, not a huge tree, but it's medium-sized tree. But here you see planted very close, and you can see the size of the trunks. They're like this. Again, this is the end of the dry season in Honduras, and there's lush foliage ready to be harvested for animal feed. It's fantastic, fantastic. These are not being eaten by roaming animals that would keep it grazed down and keep it from really getting cut at the proper times when it's at a more ideal stage for harvesting. Gliricidia, a very high protein feed. It's an excellent, excellent animal feed. This next slide you see also in Honduras. This is a plant called guazuma, and it is also during the dry season. And it too has leaves. It's not so impressive as a shrub right now, but it is have leaves that can be harvested and used for animal feed right now at the stage they are at in this photo. So this is really, really encouraging. Another surprising feed people don't often think about is hibiscus. It is an excellent forage. Animals love the leaves of it. We grow it as an ornamental, as flowers around the homes, and they're beautiful. The flowers are wonderful. But the leaves are actually really healthy and nutritious for animals. So livestock really loves them. And there are species that, there are so many species that work as perennial planted forages. I'm here in Ethiopia visiting a missionary, and here they use them planted along a berm to slow down the movement of water in fields. And so they could grow in the alleyways between these long berms and harvest this erosion barrier that is actually an incredible animal feed. And so they're again having multi-purpose plants, doing more than one thing. This is also in the highlands of Ethiopia at another location where you see mulberry. Mulberry is a tremendous animal feed. It's used all over the world. It's in Asia and Africa and in the Americas. It's commonly used. And I like to mention it, even though it is commonly used, people still often don't think of putting it into a forage bank scenario where it's planted at high density. Often big trees are harvested and you have to climb the trees. I was just 2 weeks ago working in Haiti, and the farmers had to climb these trees at perilous heights, harvesting forage from these giant trees to bring some food to their animals. It wasn't ideal. This is much more an ideal scenario where you have trees planted in these forage banks. This is again in Ethiopia. You can see a better picture here. I really enjoy this picture because it shows again multiple perennial forages. The one in the foreground is a clumping grass that can be harvested for animal feed, and that is slowing again down the movement of water as it comes down the hill, hits this berm that is protected. The soil berm is protected because the roots of the forage, the grass, goes deep, and it can be caught then and fed to animals. And then you see another hedgerow species behind that, and the field crop of teff. It's like a wheat, a grain crop planted in between. A beautiful planting, and along the edge of the fields, border plantings of fieldwood species, and at the top, a coppicing woodlot. It's a marvelous picture of a land that is stewarded well. And this missionary has worked really hard to help farmers really understand good stewardship, to really see the land as a precious inheritance from God, and that they'd leave it better for their children. And this farmer has done well. He's stewarding the land well, and it's a really encouraging sight. It's another picture also from Ethiopia, Tagasaste, another species that works well at high elevation. There are just so many species that can be used. Like I said, at Echo we have around 15 in our forage bank and continuously adding to it. And many of these species are available at Echo for use. So if you are interested in acquiring more species or species for planting in your own areas, you can get those seeds from Echo. In this picture here, you see an example of a forage bank at Echo. It's a fairly young planting still, only a few years old, but you can see that triangulated pattern that I was talking about that allows for the movement of people as they go through to harvest. And it's a system that we've liked very well. And you can see how we do our pruning cuts up higher, about a meter high. They're promoting a system now in Honduras where they are using Gliricidia as a live fence along field edges. They're promoting this among farmers who have dairy cows. And so they put the barbed wire, they attach barbed wire to the Gliricidia posts, and then every now and then they plant a mahogany tree. And they encourage this high-value mahogany tree that they will harvest in 15 or 20 years. And they are encouraging farmers to do this because that is where their long-term retirement is. This takes vision. It takes planning. And it's fun. I really enjoy talking to farmers and communicating the joy of planning out your own farm. It's so fun to have different tools and plants that you can use and incorporate in the farm. And this one, they estimate incredible financial rewards for planting these trees along their field edges. The Gliricidia is harvested then for animal feed to increase milk production along their, and then the barbed wire is what attached is to the trunks, and it keeps the cows in the pasture. And then interplanted as well at a wider spacing are these mahogany trees. I want to tell a little story. I want to kind of move to the end of this session by telling a little story of a group in Nicaragua. It's a group called New Dawn. That's what it translated to in English. I was very encouraged when I went to visit them. They had received some training from a center in Nicaragua called Rancho Ebenezer that encourages small-scale farmers to plant perennial forages to truly increase their animal production. And this group was gathering here, and they welcomed us into their community and showed us some of their fields. And if you look in this next slide, you see what the typical fields look like. They're burnt. The hillsides are naked. They're exposed. This is grievous. It's so grievous to see this land exposed like this, barren and just naked. This is not the way God intended it. This is not leading toward abundance. And when these people receive training, when they caught the vision and understand, wow, God intends life. God has made it possible for abundance to happen. God has made it possible for animals not just to eke through the dry season, but to be fat even after the dry season, through having these available forages. When they caught that vision, they were able to stop using fire as part of their annual cycle. They were like one of the few farmers in the area that no longer used fire anymore. And they planted this hillside together as a community. And I just want to show you this picture. I want to honor them with what they've done. This picture is only about 11 months after they planted. It may not be that impressive, but if you visited there and stood with them and you heard them and their hope and represented in what they had done, it was so exciting and encouraging to see them take these steps forward, these courageous steps forward, these farmers who are going to be transforming their communities by converting to these practices that are so beneficial in the long run. And so they've planted these hedgerows of forages along this steep slope, and you can see them there. And then they've incorporated some other species to it, pineapples and papayas, to get some other products out of it. Fruit products. And they've planted these along the contour, along the level of this hillside, and that's slowing down the movement of water. And they take and harvest these leaves and bring it to their animals, which they now have confined, so they can do more with their land. They're able to convert more land to other things, to fruits and other options, because their animals are confined and no longer ranging across the fields. And then they bring the sticks back that the animals haven't eaten, and they lay those behind the hedgerows. And that further slows down the movement. It brings back organic matter back. And now if you look in just the foreground of this picture, you see the stack of goat manure. It's huge. This was manure previously unavailable. It was scattered about and not used and stewarded well. Now they're stewarding even the most precious, one of the most precious commodities for improving fertility, this goat manure, which is a nice giant pile that they can use to provide fertility. And they have brought back mulch in the form of sugarcane that's been harvested, and instead of burning the bagasse or the leftovers, they're actually now bringing that back and laying that down and using that as mulch for the field, creating God's blanket. And this is going to contribute to long-term fertility. And here's an example, here's a picture of their animal pen. It's maybe not huge and impressive, but it's an incredible start for this community of farmers to get together and build this. And now they have their own manure source and fertility source. So they're not dependent on buying expensive fertilizers. They have a source of fertility. I want to take you now and show you a couple more pictures before we conclude this session. This is a photo from Rancho Ebenezer, where they took an abandoned hillside. And on this hillside, they no longer farmed here. The soils had become so poor that they stopped using it. And they learned about a system of recovering degraded lands from a group in the Philippines. And the system is called SALT, Sloping Agricultural Land Technology. And there's a Baptist group there that had done incredible research over many, many years, and were able to show the incredible use of this technology. People have been using vegetative barriers to control the movement of soil off hillsides for centuries, using grasses and trees and planting them. But they had done research and developed a strategy and measured the results, and were able to really provide some really solid training in this system. And it is a system where you plant, and you can kind of see it in this photo, where you see these hedgerows, and they're several meters apart going down the hillside. It's a double planting of trees, say Gliricidia, planted in a closely together, 75 centimeters apart, and they grow up and they hold the soil in place. Again, after a while, the leaves are cut and brought to the animals. The sticks that aren't eaten by the animals are laid in between these two rows of trees, and it kind of builds up, almost creates a terracing effect over a long period of time. And in the Philippines, they were able to show that farmers, when using the system with animals, where animals were actually penned up or smaller pasture, where animals were not ranging, a fourfold increase in yield, about a twofold increase, 2 times the yield increase when the tree trimmings were just cut and laid down as mulch in the fields. But where the tree trimmings were cut and used as animal feeds, there was like an increase of a farm yield of incomes, yearly incomes, by 4. It's incredible what can be done through animals, and you never really think of it, but animals and reforestation can happen at the same time. You don't think of goats and reforestation in the same statement, but you can actually have that with a system like this, where you plant these trees and they don't become competitive with your annual crops, which you are farming in the alleyways between these double hedgerows, which might be 3 or 4 or 5 meters apart. It is an impressive system. I just wanted to showcase it because it kind of gives you maybe some more ideas on how to incorporate planted forages in the farming system. It doesn't have to be in a solid block. It can be. Or it can be along these, on sloping land in these contour plantings. This picture is hard to see clearly, but it's an important one to think about or see, because this was the abandoned hillside. And it's an unimpressive picture. And now you see in the next slide, 3.5 or 4 years later, it's about 3.5 or 4 years later, is the difference. I'm going to show you in the next slide the same hillside, and it's just lush. It's green. An abandoned field has been restored because it's been stewarded well, stewarded properly. I want to encourage you with these pictures. I want to encourage you with this concept of restoring the land, of stewarding the earth well and what has been entrusted to you to take care of, to treat the land as a precious inheritance, and to really plan out how to better care for animals in your farm, on your farm. They provide such a valuable source of food and income for you. And I hope these ideas can truly provide better solutions for you to have better animal production. This is the last picture I'm going to show you, which involves the animals now at the farm at Rancho Ebenezer. They call the farm there Rancho Ebenezer. And you can see the animals that are eating the forage that has been cut from these hedgerows of trees that are planted along the contour. And so they're eating the leaves. The sticks will be returned back to the land. And the manure then is collected in this system. And you can get incredible amounts of fertility being brought back to the fields. The sticks are brought back. The manure then comes back to the fields as well. So I hope this has given you some new ideas and that you are encouraged in how to use planted perennial forages. Again, I encourage you, if you want more information on this topic, to contact ECHO. We are a resource that is available to you, and we want to help you in your planning of your own farms, in giving and providing ideas of species that make excellent animal forages. We'll be glad to provide technical notes, publications, and lists of those species that can be used in producing animals. Thank you very much.